welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke, and it is now the 3rd of October. We are now moving into my favorite month, and it is cloudy here today, which is why you have lights on behind me. It's a little too dark. So, good morning, Alex. So it's a bit of a cloudy day. I think they said one front went through that pushed the hurricane stuff out to sea. And then there's a second front that's going to come through, and by this weekend we're going to have that beautiful, crisp fall, blue skies and everything. And good morning, Sam, or good afternoon, Sam. And it's quite a nice morning. And I have to say, I slept so well last night. We had our first class at the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth, which Alex, I know you were there. I think it went really well. I think things went really good because Joanna's a very good teacher, and she knows how to do things. She messaged me after the meeting. She's like, okay, so this seminar next week, what are we doing for that? And I had to say to her, and good morning, Jenny. So I said to her last night, I said, well, we'll chat on Friday because I think it's, oh, yay, I'm so happy for you. Yeah, it was actually good. I think everything went well. And like I said, the presentation she made was interesting because she kind of built it up from the idea of, good morning, Joanne. She kind of started to talk about yes, it was really enjoyable and informative. Oh, thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, got some feedback from, somebody else who was there besides me because I tried to sit there. Good morning, Pat. I try to sit there as the moderator and not, let the person teach and I'll just sit in the background. But I do take notes in the background because I find the subject interesting. And so I figured at the end whatever my thoughts were, I would just tell everybody at the end. Good morning, Suda. So I think like I said, yesterday's class went really well. And in terms of it was amazeballs. That's so funny. Yes, it was great. Okay, good. Okay, so we got three positive reviews from 3 people who were there. Which is good. And so Joanna had messaged me and she did really enjoy the class as well. She said it was great. And she looks forward to next week, but she wants to make sure, I think she's trying to frame it the way I want it, but I'm also like, well, I want you to frame it the way you want it because, they're the teachers and I don't want to tell them how to teach. But basically, I think with next week, anybody, a lot of us here are American. I don't know that anybody on here has gone to school in Europe or in England or in different places. Now, I've gone to school in England. I don't want to make it like I took a long degree in England. I spent some time, it's kind of like I did the study abroad thing. Okay, so it's not like I'm some, I got a 4-year or 3 or 4 year degree from one of the British universities, but I did most of my English Lit degree at University of Reading. And the way that those are structured is that you have you have lectures. Because like it's here in the U.S., you basically have like 15-week course, and you show up. Now I think they do it once, like 2.5 hours. You come in once a week, and you have a textbook, and you have reading assignments, and you have stuff like that. British universities are not like that, or at least they weren't. Not when I went to school there. You basically went. And you, like I said, your lectures you could attend. You would take certain classes that were on certain topics. Like if I took a class on Chaucer, if I took a class on James Joyce, and these were real classes that I took. And so you would go and sit in the lectures that the professors would give, and you could ask questions and stuff at those lectures. And there would be, let's just say it was a 12-week semester, because the semesters are shorter in the UK. And, but then you would have like 4 or 5 seminars. And that's what the next week like this is going to be. So it's structured a little bit like the British thing. And then after seminar, you would have tutorial. So there's kind of 3 levels to the British university education. And the seminar is where you get together and you may have, you have, whoever the tutor is going to, try to talk about what the topic and frame it in a certain way. And maybe certain times you would have assignments. Like I remember having projects. I think like it was groups of us. Like when I took, good morning, Melissa. When I was taking when I was taking Chaucer, and it was like, okay, we each had to take one of the Canterbury tales, and each of us had to do our own kind of group analysis of this particular tale. So that's what I mean with seminar. Now that isn't necessarily what's going to happen here, but I told her it's going to be something where people who heard the Baba Yaga story, there's going to be some kind of reflection, because one of the things we're doing is looking at the myth, looking at it from a different perspective, and then kind of deconstructing a little bit like what, or even just feeling like what this myth means to you. I found that as she was talking about the Baba Yaga myth, and certain elements of these stories, you love that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's great. And for me, some of the stuff I'm writing now, and even some of the novels I've written, I said there is this theme in there. So it's almost like that was my creative expression of that theme. I wrote a story not about Baba Yaga, but about another character, and she's a character that's like my Morrigan character, but I wrote it in a different way and created a dialogue and scenes and things like that. But there's a lot of things people could do. People could, be inspired to draw certain characters. People could be inspired to write poetry about certain characters. There's different things that you can do. So I think it's going to be kind of geared towards that. So the people who are there just might want to think about, I think, kind of reflect on that, on what we learned, and kind of like what, how that resonates with us personally, because I think there's a lot of things that do. And I think we have to, even though everything is not just about us and our opinion and whatever, but I do think this has to be about personal creativity and personal resonance in this particular school. It's not like we're writing an academic paper for something. It's and nobody's writing any papers next week. It's just, but there might be exercises, or there might be just something that we do in class, just to kind of have, to facilitate that discussion. So whatever Joanna, whenever we talk about, if there's anything to be done in advance, I will definitely let everybody in the class know in advance. So, sorry. Okay, so anyway, so the school, I was just telling people who got here a little later, school got off to a great start last night. I think everything went well. Not really too many tech issues. It was just trying to figure out on Zoom where, if I was going to play something in the background, where you could get the audio. And apparently there's like a auditorium setting or something on YouTube, so I had to change my thing to that. And then that way, Joanna, I might just tell Joanna where that is too. Or although she's, maybe next week we might not be watching videos, but yeah, and then that way you'll have the handout and people can look at the videos that she showed, which were really, really quite interesting. Yeah, Joanna is really loves the Slavic myth stuff, and I loved the origin story with Veles and everything. I thought that was really cool. I learned she's not a deity like people say here in the U.S., but more like Befana in Italy. Yes, exactly. And I think when Christine was asking about Frau Perta and Lucy, I mean, she was saying kind of like, yeah, she's not specifically a winter deity, because Baba Yaga is really all year round. Like in the stories, you have things like, hunting for strawberries in February, where you wouldn't have those normally, in this, not in that part of the world anyway. So, yeah, like there's just different aspects of Baba Yaga where she's kind of represents all the seasons in some way, this wildness. So it was a very interesting class. So, yeah, so thank you everybody who joined. We actually had quite a few people. I think we ended up having like 6 people on last night. And then the 7th, I know who is going to be doing that. And, yeah, and I did set it up so that people can buy individual lectures. So if they say, oh, I just want the recording of that lecture, I do have it on the registration page. I actually put it at the bottom. I spent 3 hours on the phone with Wix trying to say, like, look, what if I just want to do this? And she's just like, oh, okay, this is what you can do. Because doing the booking, you have to say, it's like, oh, to buy this recording, you have to set an appointment. I'm like, no, it's not what I want to do. Can't I just sell a product on my own website, a digital product? And really, it's not going to be something that people can download. Oh my God, it was so good. Okay, yeah, wow, I'm glad. It's rave review, yeah. And I actually did think it was really, really good. But I know Joanna's like a really, really, actually all 3 of these people are really, really good teachers. They're just, many of them have teaching awards and stuff. They're just really, everybody who's in this school. I guess I'll count, I don't know, I'll count myself among my number. My teaching style is not for everybody, but I think people here can get on board with my teaching style. I have some students who are like, oh, listen to you talk about stuff, but that's undergrads. So anyway, okay, so what are we going to do today? So today on the live stream, okay, I had a couple of different things I want to talk about. I do have a ghost story for today. And, I meant to get something down from this part of my room. She was up here too in Littleton. Yes, well, she actually had a house on Lake Placid for a while. And I know she had gone over, I think when there was I don't know, something happened in her house. There was where it had to be, I don't know if it was flooded or there was a fire. It was something that went on. And her insurance company paid for her to stay over in New Hampshire, which she loves. So, yeah, something like that. Give me a minute here. There we go. Okay. Something I'd forgotten that I wanted to take down for this morning. And so she was talking about this shirt that she was wearing, and Joanne's like, yeah, I know where that is. So, so what I want to do is I want to tell our ghost story for today, which is one from England, and it is sort of, I mean, people argue about what it means, but it is actually supposed to be a true ghost story, although some people say, oh, there's things about it that are probably made up, but in any case, I'll tell you about that. It's not a personal experience, although I do have a personal experience with the place in question, so... And the other thing I was going to mention, okay, I had wild dreams last night. I slept really well, but probably after 3. Now we had the moon. The moon is now, oh goodness, where is it? It's in an oppositional phase this morning. It might be in an oppositional phase to Mars this morning, I think. And so they said, so just word of caution, today's a day where people could be emotionally explosive for no good reason. So just, take that into account. Take a deep breath, kind of, step back. And I started at about 3 a.m. But I had a really weird dream about being with somebody, this person who calls himself my brother, okay? But it wasn't either of my actual brothers. And he was, aren't they always of late? Yeah, well, certainly. But I think in light of the eclipse yesterday, this one seemed particularly, the next morning, what Azrael said to me about the dream was, he said, yeah, there's some kind of cycle that's broken. But the eclipse broke some kind of a cycle. And that we're going to see more evidence of, a certain way of doing things dying out. Now, to me, and he said it's going to be at the next important moon. Now, the next important moon to me, believe it or not, is not the next full moon. It's the one happening next week. It's a quarter moon, but it's in opposition to Pluto. So that makes a lot of sense. And because it's the idea, he's basically saying that there's an old idea. He calls it the idea of the demiurge, or the idea of God, like that idea, that very patriarchal idea. He said some kind of cycle got broken at the eclipse yesterday. And the dream was basically centered around that, because it was weird. It was like I was with this person who, and they had gone into this convenience store or something, and there was a shooting in there. And this person survived the shooting, but he actually had pictures from it, which was kind of weird. Had the phone and had pictures. But it was he and I were sitting in a car on the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of this shooting. And he's like, the shooting's going to happen again. And he says, if you can get in there, maybe you can get in there in between. Now I was wearing I'm wearing this purple sweater today. I have the red one. It was I was wearing the red one in this dream. And I was just like, oh, thanks. You want me to go in there now? In case the new moon I had new moon right after I was restless. Yeah, see, I was just the opposite. I slept like the dead. And maybe because last night I was just really, really tired after doing everything and waiting for Zoom to download the recording onto my desktop, which took ages. And I'm going to have the recording up soon. So, but it's going to be password protected and everything for the people who are in the class and for the other people who want to buy it. So in any case, we have a, so in this dream, it was I went into this store. So I was like, okay, well, I guess it's my turn to go in. But when I went in, it was it was dark. And it was my dream last night that I was being chased by a man with a gun all night. Wow. Okay. Yeah, Sam and I are kind of on the same wavelength here. It's kind of strange. It's interesting because and it's really interesting that you're in England, you're in Yorkshire, which is a really beautiful area. Are we linked or something? I know. And then you're from Jersey originally. So I'm I don't know. Next time I go over to the UK, I have to make an effort to come up and see you. Oh my God. Yeah. Because we just seem to be kind of from the same, that's just really odd. But I went in and it was the store was dark, but I could see there were people in there and they were just oh, wait, we're closed. We're closed. Yes, please. Oh, totally. Yeah. I totally can't wait till I go back. Oh my God. And I don't know when that is yet, but I will definitely let people know when that's happening. But I had gone to, I went to, so I went back to the car and I said, okay, it's dark in there. You should have a mythology tour of Europe. Yeah, that would be cool. We could probably do a mythology tour of the UK. I've been more places. Anyway, I don't want to diverge to that yet. But we had, but it's okay. So I went back to the car, but then it was like when we went back later, the store was open again, and we both realized that the shooting had already happened. Like it happened before, and it was like this brother with me came in and was showing, he had his phone and took kind of the owners, and there was a guy like there, like who was like a chef or something, or that's what he looked like. He was dressed kind of like that, and taking, like, maybe he was there cooking something there, I don't know what, but he said, showing them the pictures, saying this has happened before, and they were kind of having this conversation, and it was weird, and so I had but I don't know. Somehow the idea, and I think in that dream, probably there was the masculine element, I was the feminine element, and now I'm walking into the thing, and somehow he says that's like a representation of like a cycle being broken, like the feminine walking into the situation, and it's walking in, and it's into a dark place where you can't see, and then all of a sudden it's light again, and then they're being shown the cycle. You know what I mean? So it was kind of an interesting, weird dream. But yeah, apparently, no, this morning, like, the messages I got were, what was it? I can't remember what the words were now off the top of my head, because it's like, I know the Enochian when I look at it, but it doesn't always. I know the word Odo was there, which is like, there was an opening, Komselak Odo, opening the circle, that's what it was. And it's, so yeah, so there's an opening of a circle. And to me, that goes back to the whole cycle of, what is it? When I think of dreamless sleep as usual for me, but I really staying in the belief that things will have a marked shift soon. Yeah, and actually, that's what he had said to me. He said, okay, the circle's been broken, and now it's like that old way is dissolving. So it's like it's broken. It doesn't mean it's totally, it's more or less over, but it's like now the cleanup is kind of happening. And so that's what he is saying the elements of this month are going to be, that there's this cleanup that's going on. So, yeah, so that was really very interesting. And it does correspond, I think, as we've talked before, to the astrology that's going on. Like today, Mars is in a lot of tenuous places this month. So we just all need to be mindful that if people are, more contentious or more irritable or more, that and of course there could be some escalations. Actually, it was Pat who had pointed out to me initially when Iran had bombed Israel and was attacking Israel, and so this idea of escalation of things and what is this going to mean now. Israel does not think that it's going to blow up into this full scale like world war or anything like that, or that there's going to be nukes or anything. Like I don't like we see from Russia-Ukraine situation. So, but I mean, nonetheless, it's still a very, you're walking on tenterhooks a little bit this month with the energies that we have. So anyway, I did want to share that Azrael message, and I thought that was just really interesting. And yeah, I've been doing more. He has this one ritual he has me doing, which he doesn't want me to tell the details of, but I find that when I'm doing it, it's like I can see more and more things just with the naked eye. Like, it's just, normally you go to sleep, you dream, you have these things, but it's like I see things, like if I close my eyes, and it's not just like the light on the window. You know how you can sort of get the impression of, like, if I'm looking up at the skylight, I'll suddenly get that impression on my, like of the same shape of the window when you close your eyes. This is not that. This is something much more vivid, and it seems to be happening like every night. So I don't know. There's a whole big development that's going on there. So yeah, so that's an interesting starting point for this. Okay, and I promised a ghost story today. And the ghost story that I have, and I'm not going to read I actually have a little bit of it that I want to read, just because there's so many versions of it, and I can give you the condensed version, but it's not as interesting. Yes, that's happening to me too. Yeah, it's, oh yeah, right, with the intuition. Yeah, I think a lot of people in our class too seem to be having more, the intuitive development class seem to be having a lot more with that going on as well. Not that other people may not be as well, but I think when we're actively practicing it, like a movie scene in my mind's eye, weird. Yeah, exactly. It's like that. And for me, sometimes it's almost like it's showing up like it's a photo negative. It's kind of interesting. Or I see it with a deep violet background. I have a deck that I don't use that much, and I'll probably use it more on the live stream, that I created, called the Antarian Oracle, and I created it over COVID. While I was on, one of the things I did is I did all these paintings, and I turned them into a deck of about 25 cards, 25, 26 cards, something like that. I can't remember exactly how many are in it. And Yes, colors. Yeah, and I always see like this really, really deep violet. And it reminded me of a story that I saw. There's a channel I follow called Beyond Creepy, which is basically it's just this guy who does UFO stuff. But he was talking about this woman who was suddenly walking her dog and was this place with a violet, like a purple sunset, like this forest. And she said for some reason it was really, really a joyful place. But then it was like, I don't know, her dog wasn't with her, and then it was her dog barking that brought her back to another dimension. It was a really interesting story there. Alex, I'm attributing pressure in the back of my head as yes, and I've been having that. I literally woke up and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on at the top of my head, you know? And yeah, so much pressure, but then insights too. Yeah, because that's where the pineal gland is. And that is said to be, do some vagus nerve resetting. Yeah, like the way, right, with the release and the vagus nerve. One of the easiest vagus nerve exercises you can do is to just kind of turn your head to one side and do your eyes to turn the opposite way of your head, and just do that for about 30 seconds. And sometimes you'll get a little something, you get a little, I don't know, sometimes people get a little belch or they get a little cough or they get something, but it shows that there's the release. And then you do it kind of 30 seconds on the other side and then look the other way. And, yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll just feel some little thing in your body kind of go. But you do it until you feel that, or just do it for about 30 seconds. Thank you, but good recommendation. Yeah, that's something a lot of times when I'm working with coaching, I might recommend that people do the vagus reset. Sometimes people want to do it almost daily because, you know, we release trauma and then we make new stuff, right? So, okay. So this... Sophilagio at night once a week. Yeah, sophilagio. Yeah, that's another good thing too. Like people doing the certain frequencies and so forth, listening to certain sound frequencies, and things are also, they can be helpful. Okay, so our ghost story. If you still want to hear the ghost story. The ghost story I was going to tell you is known as the Horror of Number 50 Berkeley Square. Now, Berkeley Square is a place in London. It is it's really in the financial kind of part. It's like near Savile Row. It's over in that part of London. It's really, I think, in the city of Westminster, in that kind of a thing. Yeah, and oh, by the way, just quickly on the vagus nerve thing, you can do that, but you can also even go to YouTube and look up vagus nerve exercises. And if you want to try other ones, there's other ones up there as well. Yes, please, ghosts. Okay. So 50 Berkeley Square. I don't know if this story is familiar to people. Some version of it is. I'm a big fan of M.R. James, okay, who is a Montague Rhodes James, who was I guess he was a headmaster at Eton or something back in the turn of the century. And in fact, BBC had a Ghost Stories for Christmas that was hosted by Christopher Lee playing M.R. James, which is interesting. Like, you know, inviting the Cambridge students around at midnight, and he would tell ghost stories, right? And this is usually a Ghost Stories for Christmas, because in the UK, ghost stories tend to be a Christmas thing. Halloween's not so much of a thing, but, I mean, it sort of is, but but Christmas is really the ghost story time, right? I saw that, yes. And, yeah, so the 50 Berkeley Square is a story I heard about years ago when I was a child. And I'm just going to read a little bit, because I have to see this really, really old book that I have. And again, it's a short story, but there's a lot of, because it's written like Victorian style, and there's a lot of detail, so I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff, because we don't have that much time. I'm going to try to keep it to like maybe 10 minutes. Okay. So, in 1890, Society for Psychical Research organized an inquiry among the citizens of London to try to find out how many had experience of ghosts and hauntings. Questionnaires were sent to 17,000 selected at random. Out of these, 15,316 replied that they had not had any such experience, while 1,684 replied that they had. This represents some 10%, and it is certainly high. At the same time, it is not disproportionate for a city so old as London and rich in history, violence, strange events, and ancient buildings. Yeah, and London, actually, it's interesting. We always think of the British as being, you know, very polite and very reserved, but Britain's actually has a really, really violent history. It's not, you know, there's so many places you go to where there's plague pits, and there's places where people were hung, drawn, and quartered, and you go all over London, and there's just so much. I have a friend there who, when I would go to stay with him, he would he always like wanted to do stuff like be like, oh, like he thought would interest me. So we did a Roman ruins tour of London once, And then another time we did like, I had actually a book of like a London ghost walk, and he's like, oh, let's do this. And he's like, because it was telling you to take a certain path. He's like, no, you can't go that way because there's construction, but we can go this way. And I was really glad I went with him because, you know, he knows London, he knows the East End especially, like the back of his hand. So it was useful to go with him for sure. And okay, at that time in the 1890s, when Berkeley Square was in the heyday of its elegance, number 50 was one of the most famous of all London's haunted houses. Sightseers from other parts of London and even visitors from the country seeking a thrill which would cost them nothing found their way to the square and stood before the house, imagining what it might be like to submit to the experience of an encounter with the nameless horror. Okay, and so they describe the house. He says, the house itself served to heighten the chill spasms of cold which coursed down the spines of even the least imaginative as they stood gazing at it. It had been empty for many years, and its Georgian facade was pocked with every evidence of general decay. Window panes were broken, and those that were not were covered with grime. Through some less opaque than the rest, curtains could be seen hanging tipsily from cockeyed rods, their tatters moved by interior currents of air. The paint of the window frames clung precariously here and there in flakes. The brickwork was shadowed with the dark grease-dirt of the capital's soot-laden atmosphere. A soot-laden atmosphere that still persists to this day, actually. The area leading to the basement was a rubbish dump for torn and discolored scraps of paper, bottles, and the carcass of a cat. Oh, that's not nice. Even the house agent's to let sign contributed to the general dilapidation, for it hung crazily on a tilting post. Yeah, great imagery. This is Victorian writing. This is why I love Victorian ghost stories, because they know how to describe stuff. Some people think they go overboard, but I just, you know. And actually, M.R. James does do a story, I think, where he, is it him? Yeah, where he kind of almost makes fun of that flowery way of writing, but nonetheless, it can be very, very interesting. Okay, so it said, so they were talking about the haunting, and I just want to skip over because I don't want to get through all these pages. They were saying, okay, so it says, before the house achieved its evil reputation, it had resembled any of the others in Berkeley Square. But this conformist period did not last long. Its strange nonconformity descended upon it after it had been vacated by a tenant of the late 18th century, a Mr. Dupre of Wilton Park, and was attributed to the fact that Dupre had confined in its attics an insane brother, whose madness made him so violent no one could approach him. He even had to be fed through a slot in the door. Okay? Whether this unhappy man's restless spirit was a horror or not is difficult to say, for the room which the horror haunted was not in the attics, but a bedroom on the second floor. A bedroom I've been in, by the way, so I'll tell you about that. Rumors naturally tended to enlarge the reputation of a house so haunted, and it was certainly rumor on which the author of an article of a now-defunct Society of Mayfair, when he wrote in 1888, "The house in Berkeley Square contains at least one room of which the atmosphere is supernaturally fatal to mind and body alike. The very party of the walls of the house, when touched, are found saturated with electric horror. It is uninhabited save by an elderly man and woman who act as caretakers, but even these have no access to the room. That is kept locked, key being kept in the hands of a mysteriously and seemingly nameless person, who comes to the house once every 6 months, locks up the elderly couple in the basement, and then unlocks the room and occupies himself in it for hours." Rumors also provided alternatives. One was that it was a haunting by a child in a Scots plaid who was said to have been frightened to death by her nursery and wandering about the house. Another purported it was the ghost of a man who had gone mad in an upper room waiting for a message that never came. Okay, so basically it said none of that was ever authenticated. So now they talk about, there was a, let's see, okay, let me find it. There are 2 authenticated accounts of encounters with the horror. One is of a gentleman who refused to be deterred by the reputed fate of earlier victims and insisted on passing a night in the ghost room. The other is of 2 seamen of Her Majesty's Navy who emulated the gentleman, all ignorance, one whom afterwards gave a full account of his experiences to the Metropolitan Police. Now, what's supposed to happen at 50 Berkeley Square, just to kind of, move things along here, what the hell? Yeah, is that you go, there's this one room, and that people will pass a night in it. And it doesn't matter, they can go in there armed, and as they're there, usually around midnight, whatever, and of course it's a room, these rooms have fireplaces and stuff, so, you sit there, and there's the bed, that something comes into the room that is so horrible, and such a thing that is such an affront to your mind, and of course, shooting at it doesn't do anything. That the idea of this nameless horror creeping towards them causes them to literally almost have a heart attack and die on the spot. I think the way it was put is if you, M.R. James had mentioned it in something called A School Story, where you pass the night and then when people hear like an alarm sound or a scream or something, they open the door and the person just says, "I've seen it," and they die. So that's the horror of Berkeley Square in this thing. So they're talking about Sir Robert Warboys, the 7th Baronet, was the first to challenge the horror. A young man just turned 30, his patrimony was that he could afford to live in fine style, while his tastes, though lavish, were well controlled, so there was never any possibility of him becoming bankrupt. So many of his class contemporaries, much wealthier than he, became within a few years of inheriting. Okay, so we've got this Sir Robert here, and so basically what happens, I'm going to skip over this, he goes to a tavern and people talk about the house and he scoffs at it. He says, "This is nonsense. I'm going to go stay in the house." And so he basically says, "No, I'm going to go stay there." And he says, what was it? Again, They soon discovered he was not easily swayed, but when they were trying to find some argument that might him reconsider his stand, because he decides he's going to do it, that the owner of 50 of Berkeley Square happened to come into the room. "Here's a man you can't refute." "Oh," said Sir Robert, "and why not?" "Because he has a ghost in his house, 50 Berkeley Square." That's right, they were telling ghost stories, and he's like, "They're all nonsense," right? They said to the newcomer, "The man we wanted to see. We were trying to convince Warboys here of the existence of ghosts. Tell him about yours." And he looked at the company seriously. He says, "I hope your lordship will not press me. We prefer not to talk about it." He says, "You have one of the most famous ghosts in all of London living with you, and you prefer not to talk about it." So he doesn't... and so finally he tells them about it, and he says, "Have you ever seen it?" And he says, "No, we haven't." "Then perhaps you have heard it." And he says, "No." And he says, "Then why?" And he says, "Because, Sir Robert, the records are all too well authenticated to leave room for doubt." And he says, "Now you've gone so far, surely you can tell him and outline all the events." So he gives way to the pressure of the company, and having overcome his reluctance, and made a full recital of the horror, which was much of which was new even to the well-informed audience. And he said, but the guy is still not moved. So he decides that he's going to go. He pays to stay the night, and okay, so what happens is he's staying in this room, and he says he's going to go stay in this room, but he has to promise this guy Sir Robert that he will should anything happen, you feel you need assistance, you will not hesitate to ring. That there was a bell, and my butler has rewired it so that it will ring here. And he says, "We can be with you in 2 minutes of your ringing. Promise that for peace of mind you will not." He says, "Yes, I will do that, but I will ask something in return. If I need assistance, of which I am convinced I shall not, I will ring twice. If I ring once, ignore it, because I may do it from nerves, for I will confess to you that I am experiencing internal excitement, which I did not at all expect," right? So he does this, and I'm going to kind of jump to the end here, because we don't want to, because this could get very long. And so they are, they're sitting in this room. He's in this room with a friend. And let's see. Okay, wait. No, that's the other one. That's the sailors. Okay, that's why there's 3 stories in here. Okay, so that he goes to bed. They give him the bell pull, and he gives it the pill to see how it works. And he says, "Let me remind you not to disturb me if I only ring once." Left to himself, Warboys removed his coat, cravat, and shoes and lay down on the bed outside the covers, for the fire, which now glowed in the grate, had warmed the room. Beside his right hand he placed the pistol cocked. Beside his left hand arranged the tasseled end of the bell pull. He did not expect to sleep. He propped himself up on the pillows, prepared to watch out the night. When the gentleman returned to the drawing room, the clock on the mantelpiece indicated 20 minutes past 11. So downstairs they said, "Well, what shall we do? Shall we organize ourselves into watches or what?" He says, "There's little need for that, I think. I, for one, shall not sleep in any case if we drop off. The bell is loud enough to waken the soundest sleeper, though I pray God we don't hear it." So they settled themselves and sank into a drowsy silence. The hands of the clock approached midnight, and presently its silver chimes sprinkled themselves on the breathing room. Halfway through, they were joined by the more masculine base of the grandfather clock on the landing, and the last of these was still vibrating when the bell pealed shortly. The men sat up, their half-stupor shaken off, their gaze fixed upon the bell. Benson started for the door, but the Lord reminded him of their undertaking. He must ring again. The last word was stifled by a second violent peal, so violent that the bell seemed on the point of jerking off the spring. Benson was the first through the door, with the others hard on his heels. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he was halfway up when a shot rang out. Seconds later, he flung open the door of the room. Sir Robert Warboys was sprawled half on the bed, his head near the floor, his legs agape on the covers. In his left hand, he grasped the bell pull which had come away from its spring. On the floor, by his flung-out hand, lay his pistol. And he looks at it, and apparently he's dead. And he says, so they say, cover him. And for Sir Robert's eyes stared at them, and his lips drawn tightly back over his teeth revealed the latter tightly clenched as though he were suffering from epilepsy. But it was the ineffable terror of stark dread, the dread in the eyes that almost unmanned them. And they says, is he dead? And they said, it's not. They're saying it's not a suicide. And so there's this death of this guy, okay? I'm going to stop there because I'm already getting to 7:36. But this is the idea that you go into the horror and you have these guys who are very skeptical and they're like, oh yeah, this is, it's nothing, it's stupid. And then they're like, but then they go and they spend the night and something creeps into the room. And even though they think I've got my pistol, so if somebody sneaks into my room, I can just shoot them. And that doesn't do anything against these kind of invaders. So my connection to this house at Berkeley Square. Berkeley Square, now again, there are many documentaries on this, and people say, oh no, it was a story made up, and there's all kinds of people who try to debunk the whole story. Now there used to be a rare bookseller there known as Maggs Brothers, and when I worked at FDU the first time, to pay for his disbelief, he paid with his life. Right, and apparently, the way the stories go, he's not the only one. And there's so many other stories that are based on this one that try to explain what the horror is, but nobody can quite say what it is. Like, people say it's like something that kind of oozes into the room. And, whatever it is, it's so horrible, like the mind can't comprehend whatever it is. And people, the terror is just such that they, like I said, they either, they die, like, suddenly, Now, the house itself, the thing I had to get down was, I've been to Maggs Brothers many times, and there's the house, okay? There's their thing. Now Maggs Brothers is no longer at 50 Berkeley Square. They had to move because of, it's a really old rickety house with, if you've been in an old house, like some of us were in like the New Englandish area, the kind of warped staircases and stuff. It was the creaky stairs, you would go upstairs and to really have it as a bookstore. It's cool, but I think from a practical, like, insurance standpoint, it wasn't great. So they moved, but I did go to Maggs several times. And I can tell you that the room of the nameless horror was actually the accounting office. And I remember I mentioned that when I walked in because I had to go in to pay for something. It used to be that you would go into that office and you would pay. Although the second time I went in, they didn't take you up there. And that was back, when did I first buy things at Maggs? It might have been when in the early 90s. And I have 2 books that I bought from there because everything in there was really expensive. Like they had some cool original works of like alchemy and stuff, but they're like, wow, that's like that's my mortgage payment right there. It was a lot of money. So I just got things that were lesser, that were interesting to me, like theologically. I have a treatise, a sermon on the return of Charles II, just before the fire of London. I think it was printed in the 1660s, so I actually have that. Which I think I pulled it out when Charles III went to the throne, and I was like, oh, I have the thing about Charles II from the time period, and I had gotten it at Maggs. And, so I can tell you, just being in that office, of course, it was the daytime, and there's people working and on computers and stuff, so it's not, like, it doesn't have the same atmosphere as if you were in a bedroom overnight. So whether or not there's a truth to it, I don't know. It was a really cool, spooky old house, and obviously the house is still there. I don't know what it is now or if it's a private residence. The 50 Berkeley Square is definitely, and again, it's in this very posh section of London. but I've been there 2 or 3 times, and yeah, I wish I had a ghost story from there from myself. But I remember when I saw it, I was like, oh, there's a and it was Dr. Jim Frazier, who I used to work for at FDU. He passed away in 2014, I think. He's been gone for a while. But Jim had said to me, oh, if you're going to London, you really need to go see Mags and tell them that I sent you. Because really, you weren't allowed to just go in and browse. You had to tell them what you were looking for. So I was doing some research, so I just told them, well, I need to know this kind of literature. And they were like, oh, okay, you can go up to this room and you can take a look, you know. And, of course, they all knew him there because he was the rare book man. I went to Berkeley, but I didn't know about that. Wish I knew. Yes, and it is near, yeah. Berkeley Square is very much, it's kind of in a weird spot, like trying to cross the street and stuff. Like they always have those kind of gardens in the middle. Like they'll have, the Berkeley Square is literally right in the middle, and it's just around the edge. But the way that the roundabouts are in the other areas, it's like you have to, it's a little bit of a maze trying to cross over to the place. But yeah, it's rather interesting. So anyway, yeah, a little bit just trying to read through this story and not trying to read through the whole thing, where we'd be here for 2 hours probably, or at least an hour. So yeah, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about the stories that have been written about it. But this is just one that I have, and I think what was it? Bulwark Lytton, I think is the last name of the author. Or Leighton, I'm trying to remember who it was. Anyway, somebody else had written a story about 50 Berkeley Square that was pure fiction, and trying to theorize that there was some kind of a chemical thing going on or something in there. Like it was like a really weird story. I didn't like the story because the guy brings his dog and then leaves the dog in the room chained up, and that did not go well. And that, to me, I was just like, I hated the author. I'm like, you don't ever put a dog in a story and have anything happen to it. Yes. I'll cling to my beliefs. Yeah, I wonder if there's anyone chanted the Hanuman Chalisa there. Yeah, you know, well, probably. You know what? That's a good question. Probably not, just given, you know, given the era and everything there, and given the people who were kind of running the store. I'll cling to my beliefs. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's interesting, and you have to wonder too with hauntings as to whether or not the hauntings will. You wonder when something has a reputation. Again, I had kind of gotten back to this in our intuitive development class, how much of it might be an egregore, like enough people believe something's there, so then they see something, or something is kind of created that's actually there, but it's not really a ghost, it's like a collection of thoughts. Or how much of it is actually, and if it is, because they're not saying it's a ghost of a person, they're trying to say, oh, it's somebody who went crazy. But again, yeah, it wasn't in the attic, it was somewhere else that this takes place. And thought forms. Yeah, exactly. And that can happen with hauntings sometimes, where you can have enough people believe that something's going on that it actually almost creates kind of this energetic reality that can also be easily dissolved. But I also think too, and I think that was a question that we had talked about in the class too, like if over time, if people worship certain deities and things over time, and eventually they stop doing that, do they lose their potency? Or do they just somehow become dormant in some way? It's an interesting question, you know? Like urban legends. Yeah, well, urban legends certainly, yeah, I mean, people who will do things, there's the question of how much of it is imagination and how much of it is stuff that really happens. You know, because inevitably in these stories, you have somebody who's a real, you know, smart ass who's like, oh, I know everything kind of thing. And they say, oh, this is all nonsense. You know, like it's like the rite of passage thing. There's a wonderful, or black magic, evil. Yeah, well, I mean, people do compact those kinds of things. I think of, you know, the Vargamata Tantra and things like that, where people do engage in that. Or I mean, voodoo does not have to be that, but there are voodoo practitioners that might do that as well. I mean, I don't want to disparage voodoo in that way, because there's a lot of good things about voodoo also. But it's, but yeah, there's people who do these kinds of things that are more. They're more terrestrial. It's more like about cursing people or things like that. And again, I don't know. It's not clear. We never really quite clear on what the nameless horror is, and it's there's been a ton of writing on what it might be, or the evil eye. Oh yeah, that's definitely the Malocchio is definitely a kind of an Italian thing. The idea of somebody giving the evil eye, but it's probably not just. There's other versions of it, I'm sure, outside of Italy as well. But anyway, so that's just our little story to ponder for the day. Like the entity. Yeah, the entity is a curious one too. Or actually even like poltergeist activity. When you deal with poltergeists as an egregore, Yeah, well, yeah, well, you know what, and that's just it too. I remember Lon Milo Duquette saying, if somebody places a curse on you, like Kenneth Anger was fond of sending people curses all the time. And he said, yeah, the curses matter whether or not, a lot of it has to do with whether or not you believe in it. If you think that you are cursed, then that might be, he said, but the idea that you could be truly cursed is actually pretty rare. Although, again, the price of cursing somebody too. There's always it's like in Joanna's lecture last night, which I know not everybody here was there, but whenever you appeal to these powers, there's always a price, and so are you willing to pay the price? So it's interesting what that means. But in poltergeists, a lot of times this is something that is created with the mind in a different way. It's like the energy that can come off the mind can actually move objects and things, and they said it is actually energy. We were just talking about the pineal gland, and we were talking about the pituitary and the different things that when they become active under certain circumstances, where there might also be psychological trauma, a lot of times then a certain individual can be a beacon for stuff happening. But what's happening is actually psychological. It's not that there's a ghost there. People are trying to find a ghost. Like the Enfield poltergeist, which was they made that the subject of Conjuring 2, and it was based on the Warrens and what they said about it. And the Warrens are just they're largely full of crap, the Warrens. I don't, sometimes their stuff is fun to read, but to them, because they're coming from a very uber Catholic perspective, everything's demons, right? And there's a lot about Ed Warren that I consider particularly to be, maybe both of them, kind of like shady about how they went about a lot of this stuff. Nonetheless, there's a lot of interesting stories there, but they said they went to this house in Enfield, and I'm like, yeah, they really didn't, they just went there, they were not part of the case, and they're all trying to say, it's this ghost, and the scientific psycho research was trying to say it was this guy Bill who used to live in the house, and it's like, poltergeists are not ghosts. Poltergeists are, the word means noisy ghost, but it's not or noisy spirit, but that's not what they are. They're like a psychological manifestation, in a way. Now, exactly how it happens is what parapsychologists try to figure out. They're like, okay, what is this force? They call it psi, PSI, but we don't really know what that is. That can kind of move objects, and sometimes it'll appear on camera as like these long, almost helix type structures that are made out of light. And it's like, well, what are those? What is that? So it just gets back to we don't know what any of that stuff is. So anyway, we're actually at time, and I still haven't done our reading. So let's do that really quick, and we'll have another story tomorrow. I'll have to see what I think is next. Try to keep it short. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, for what it was worth. We're starting with the celebration card. So this is a nice start. This is the idea of, something that is, so this idea of celebration, but we've got the cards that flank it on either side. We've got morality, which is this idea of judgment, and compromise. So that's almost like what we're faced with here, both internally and externally. The idea that there's a time for a celebration, but there's something in us that still pulls back and says that either, we shouldn't, or, maybe we can celebrate, but it's qualified in some way. That there's some kind of we're not allowing ourselves to fully enjoy the richness of things because we are qualifying it with, we always feel like, you can feel like something really good happens and you kind of go, oh yeah, well, and the expression I've been using a lot lately is waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're kind of at this point where you're like, okay, this is too good to be true. Like, this can't be, there can't be a reason to celebrate here. Okay, so it seems like we are I think part of this energy that's going on right now, it's putting us at odds with what we think we ought to be is proper socially or proper in terms of what we've been raised with about what we can enjoy and what we can't enjoy kind of thing, or what we can entertain or can't entertain. And our card is New Vision. So again, this is the idea of getting out of this way of thinking, getting out of this morality, and getting out of this compromise, where we compromise our truth because we say, well, I'll do a little bit of what I like, but I'll do this other thing too, because this will satisfy, that other side of me, whether it's to make money. I hate this job, but it makes money and it's fine for now, and I can do my other thing for a couple of hours. It's like, that's just one example, but the ways in which we compromise our truth, and it's because of this morality about what things should be really. And it's like, we're not in a time where things are necessarily going to be the same, where the old moralities don't hold. So yeah, New Vision, the idea of looking at things in their depths. And places where we're stuck, because this is the Hanged Man card, this is about the way in which those we break out of those patterns and those systems, and see everything, the big view, not just that narrow view that's based on what the script has always been. And the ultimate outcome we have is the ripeness card, okay? Because the time is ripe, and it's a 9. This is the end of a particular cycle, and we're in a space where we should be celebrating, but it's almost like when you adopt an animal that's been abused, and it's like you bring them to a home where they're finally like safe and they can have like, a good life. They can roam around. They get food. They get fed. They get all, you get those cat owners like who will make like a little room for them and stuff. It's apples. So you have this with these, yes, and the apples on the card. Yes, the ripeness of these apples. And I just went apple picking the other day too. Just thought about that. But they have this, but it's almost like when you have the pet that comes into your house that you love and you want to take care of, but the pet's like looking around like, waiting to be, and it hisses and they hide under the bed because they're still expecting to be, yes, they don't trust you yet, or the new normal. Right. And we're a little bit like that. Yeah, he was thinking of me apple picking. Yeah, my sister and I went out apple picking the other day. She picked most of them because she eats more apples than I do. I don't hate apples. I just don't eat them that much. I don't know. They're just like anything that requires work to like cut up, or even the way that you eat an apple, like biting into it. I'm just like, it's too much work. So I'm just lazy with that. But it's So there's this energy here of we are still expecting the old, and it's telling us no, we can celebrate because the time is ripe. This is 9 of Pentacles. This is about sovereignty. It's about being independent. It's about having abundance. It's about being secure and having enough. And it's definitely it's a Pentacle card. So we are now back to this kind of earthy energy, this kind of feminine energy that that grounds us, but also allows us to feel secure in the space we're going into. So since this is an outcome, this is a space we're moving into. We're moving into that ripeness where not only we can feel secure and stable, but also that we can, share whatever riches we have. The time is ripe for us to do whatever it is that we've been wanting to do, and not to play these games anymore. So, makes me think of Baba Yaga and the earth. Exactly, because it's right, because because with Baba Yaga, there's this kind of this sense of how do you approach her, and if whether or not she's going to be approached in the right way, and what kind of, and again, you don't approach it strictly to get reward. You approach it, because because you're just doing. I mean, like Joanna had said that there was. Because usually people who are not necessarily that intellectually bright, but who are good, are usually the people she favors. And I was thinking about that. I said, the reason for that is that the intellect, that's a very masculine thing. You've either got the person who's, as she said, strong, the person who's got brute force. Then you have the person who is very, very smart. And therefore thinks they know it better than everybody else because of their intellect. So you've got this brute force, this like Heracles kind of thing. You've got the intellect. These are the very masculine things. But the one who comes in kind of with that innocence, actually. She's saying the person who's stupid, but really, no, just the person who's innocent, like who has that fool energy. That's the energy that nature is receptive to. So, interesting thing to think about there. Okay, so we are overtime today. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll try to have a little bit of a shorter story tomorrow. But I hope you enjoyed that, and and like I said, just be aware Mars is in kind of a weird place, so things could be kind of a little explosive in places, but you're welcome. And but other than that, it seems like we're really moving into a time to celebrate. So so I hope you all have a really great day, and you're welcome. And people in the class I will be in touch with this week, you are welcome. And and like I said, and I think Pat, I'm going to see Pat tonight. So. See you later. Yep. Great. So you all have a great day, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Take care.